Good morning. Today I'm going to do a short video on how to remove the rear tire off a Himiway fat tire bike. Just the basic steps, and I'll show you how to do it best I can. Let's get to it. For the tools I'll be using today, I've got my persuader, a pair of wire cutters, a crescent wrench, a number 4 and number 5 metric Allen wrench, and I'll also grab a black zip tie that I got along with my Himiway bike to reattach the wire once I'm done. The first step is to flip your bike upside down. I use blocks on the handlebars. That keeps the any of the equipment, the electronics, the cell phone holders, that type of thing up off the ground so they don't get damaged. It also gives me nice access to the rear tire to do all the work we're going to be doing today. First step I'm going to take is I'm going to remove this plastic cap off of the axle nut, and I'm going to remove this bolt for the rear fender attachment. Careful, it springs. Comes out one screw, just set that aside. Next thing I want to do is I want to remove the rear disc brake. To get it out of the way, it'll make reassembling the tire a lot simpler. You take these two bolts off using the number 5 Allen wrench, metric Allen wrench. After removing the bolts, the caliper just slides off. Bring it outside and outside the rack. These are the two bolts that came out. Just set those aside with your other fasteners. Next thing, I'm going to use the wire cutters to clip off the zip tie holding the wire to the motor, the electrical wire to the motor off. Throw away that zip tie. Unhook the connector here by pulling it straight out. Don't twist that. They just insert straight in and come straight out. Next thing I want to do is remove the derailleur guard, which will also release the back fender stay. And I use a number 4 Allen wrench for that. Now when you take these two bolts out, you'll find that this bolt and the other bolt are different lengths. The longer bolt goes through the fender attachment into the frame, and the shorter bolt just goes through the derailleur. So your derailleur's off, you got the other bolt, set those aside for later. Now I'm going to pull this rubber cap off of the axle bolt, and I'm going to run it up the wire a little bit just to get it out of the way so I can get in here and see what I'm working with. You'll note that there's a notch in the top of the axle here that goes down in the when the bike's right side up, or now it's upside down, this will be up. Make sure when you assemble the tire back onto the bike that notch is in that same position. Now next I want to take the chain off the front here and just let it slip down. That gives me loose chain back here to work with. When I go to pull it out, I can pull this stuff out of the way, and it's easier to get things undone if this is loose. You want to take your crescent wrench, or if you have the proper size wrench, that's fine too. Put it on the axle nut, break that loose. That can be kind of tough because they're tightened down pretty good most of the time. Now I want to loosen this, but I'm not going to take the nut completely off. There's no real need to do that. You just want to get it good and loose so it moves around maybe a 1/16 of an inch or more. Just about that much. You're going to want to do the same thing on the other side. This one again, you just want to loosen up, and the reason is I'm going to have to use the hammer. These are in there. So a little pro tip I've learned since I did the filming of the rear tire disassembly and reassembly is that you don't necessarily need a hammer to pop those axles loose. Let me show you. The nut off this side of the axle, you can actually set your adjustable wrench to the flats, and you can slowly rotate the axle so it lines up with the slot. And then once that happens, it'll slide in like butter. Because typically the reason it won't come off is that it's cranked over. This is twisted over a little bit and it's bound up in this thing. So if you take the nut off, rotate the axle so these flats line up with the slot, it'll just come right out. Next step is just to simply reach in, pull the tire back up and towards you, and route it around this chain so it doesn't get in the way. Just give it a little tug, pulls right up and out, and your back tire is disassembled. When you put your tire back on the bike, you're going to want to make sure this notch and this notch are in the same orientation heading down out of the frame. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time getting this thing put back together. Now, this is one of the tougher parts. You're going to want to lift this up, set it these notches, keeping the chain down out of your way. That's a little bit difficult, but stay with it. Keep rotating it until it gets to where you need to be, and hopefully it'll slide right in for you. This one, the frame is a little bit sprung in, so we're going to have to give it a little effort over here. There it goes. This one went in a lot easier than the last one I did. So be prepared to have to give it a little help. Now that you've fully seated the axle into the notches on the frame, you're going to want to tighten up both the axle nuts on either side. Same process on this side. Now while I'm on this side, I'm going to go ahead and bring the fender support back up, slide the bolt in, and put it back in its spot. I'm also going to put the axle nut cover back on. Now, just to get the bike chain out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and put it back on the top sprocket here. Next, I want to reattach the wire connector that goes to the controller. I'm going to start by putting on the plastic nut. And then I'm going to come up here, and on the connector you'll find an arrow on either one. You want to line those arrows up and you want to push it straight in. There's also a little line on the connector. You want to make sure you push in all the way to that point so you don't have a loose connection in here. Then to finish that off, you run the zip tie through this zip tie attachment point. Pull it really tight so it stays right where it's at, and clip off the excess with a wire clipper. Discard the rest. Next, I'm going to put the derailleur guard back on. Remember, there are two lengths of bolts. The longer one goes through the fender attachment, the shorter one goes straight into the frame. I'm going to start with the fender attachment. I'm also going to make sure that the brake line is outside the derailleur. I'm going to pull this little rubber cap back off so I can get that lined up. I'm not going to crank it down all the way yet because I want to get the other bolt started while I can still move the derailleur guard. I'm going to go ahead now and snug both of these down. Kind of just move it around, get it situated. Snug that one down. Snug that one down. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten those up. I'm going to put the rubber cap back on. Now that this side's complete, I'm going to go around to the other side, double check everything over there. Then I'm going to flip the bike over before I put the other brake caliper back on. The brake caliper is a lot easier to put on once the bike is right side up. So the next thing I want to do is take the 2 bolts that I took out of the brake caliper and put the brake caliper back on here. I'm going to put them in so they're loose fit, and then I'll do the adjustment as I tighten everything up. Make sure you run it inside your bike rack if you have one on there. Slide the caliper on the disc, move it up into position to get that first bolt started. And then I'm just hand tightening that in a little bit. I'm going to do that with both of them. Tighten it down just enough where it's about to bind the caliper, but not quite. The reason being is you don't want to have to back it out a whole bunch when you're adjusting your caliper. Okay, so it can still move, but the nut or the bolts are almost all the way in. So next thing you want to do is you want to have somebody clamp down on the brake up above, and that will tighten the inside pad to the rotor and allow you to tighten this up and have a fairly good adjustment right there. Now, if you don't got someone to help you, you can use a clamp like I have. That does work. You just got to be careful you don't over tighten that up there. Tighten those nice and down and tight. That way the caliper's on there, and release the brake. Next thing you want to do to make sure if that's aligned correctly is you lean the bike over on the kickstand and you just roll it. As long as it spins freely like that, then it's fairly well adjusted. You may need to loosen one of these back up and slide it in a little bit to free that up if it's still too tight. So now I've completed the brake adjustment. It spins very freely, no problems there. I'm going to put the brake or the battery back on. I'm going to turn on the bike. I'm going to lean the bike up on the kickstand so the rear tire is off the ground. And I'm just going to check and make sure that everything runs freely and that the brake works. All that's left to do is take it for a quick ride, make sure everything runs smooth and that nothing falls off on you. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully there was some good info for you, and I will catch you next time.